Right, good afternoon. My name's Esther and this afternoon I'm presenting together with John Mugo, who's Director of Youth and Talent at Zizi Afrique, an NGO in Kenya. I'm a Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution, and I've typically done most of my research in the Asia Pacific. One of the things that John and I have discovered over the past year or so is that we have a great deal in common in our work. However, this is not about, great commonalities and everybody feeling good and we've got this idyllic set of solutions that are going to solve what's happening in the NGO sector as well as in the formal education sector. But we are aware that across the NGO sector and where I work, which is mainly in large-scale formal education systems, we have a lot of the same issues. We have a lot of the same needs. And so we're going to be talking about that. Now, I'm sure that if you've been hanging around different conferences, if you've been reading a lot of publications around 21st century skills, you will have heard that everybody needs these new skills. There's nothing new about that. You will have heard lots of lists about these skills. What we haven't heard is how do we help students to develop the skills. So moving away from the great sort of mission, we need to be thinking about what do we actually do in the classroom. And so those of you who were here for the last presentation with Reemers will have heard one particular approach to that issue. And we're going to talk about a slightly different one. My major thesis here is that we have to start moving away from talking about, hey, we've got to equip these students with skills, we've got all these gaps in the market, to saying, how do we actually do it? Yeah. My own acquaintance with 21st century skills happened about 8 years ago. It was very sudden. I was a normal academic in a university, and a colleague and I were given a very large project to do. And we knew absolutely nothing about it. And it was about 21st century skills. And over the Christmas break in 2009, I basically spent that whole vacation reading employer statements about the gaps in the workforce, reading statements from OECD and UNESCO about how do we envisage citizens of the next century and so on. However, now I'm back here in 2018, and my perspective is very different. And that perspective is coming from the point of view where I need to be thinking about what does this mean for students in schools? What do these skills that we're talking about actually look like? So a much more grounded approach. So what I'm thinking about is how do we build the skills? How do we develop the skills? How do we teach the skills? These are the issues. And when I talk about skills, I'm talking about transferable skills. I'm talking about generalisable skills, the skills that we all use every day, the skills that are not specific to a particular occupation, a particular trade, a particular profession, the skills that we depend on every day from probably the moment we wake up to the moment we go to sleep. How do we solve problems? How do we communicate? How do we communicate to different people in different ways? How do we work together? How do we think critically? These are the sorts of skills. So very, very basic skills that need to underpin the way we want our students to learn in our education systems. So what I want to do is move away from that to what does this mean for education? So look at this map. What we have here is some research that we've been doing at Brookings over the last couple of years. And we have about 153 countries here. And of the countries that are sort of in grey, they're the ones that we did not pick up, right? So not included in our research. The ones where we have the stripy lines are ones where we didn't find any evidence of transferable skills in any documents from the education departments in the countries. So in other words, what this research was about was trying to find out, if we look at education systems worldwide, how many education systems are making a transition to thinking about whether they need to integrate transferable skills into their curricula. So we were looking for identification of things like critical thinking, creativity, problem solving, and so on. The pale pink countries there are about 53 of them, I think, were the countries that somewhere in their mission or vision statements said, yes, we want our students to emerge being able to think critically, to be autonomous learners and so on. So just a statement, pretty much like the listing of the skills. Then we had another just over 50 countries in the sort of the stronger pink, and those countries identified within their curricular documents specific skills. So moving up a little bit of a level in terms of thinking through what are the implications as trying to bring these different learning goals into the system. The red countries were the countries that we could find evidence of learning progressions, skills progressions in their curriculum. So you can see, for example, Australia is one. I'm from Australia, and not that that's got anything to do with me. You can also see South Africa, Peru. So a lot of different countries. One of the issues when you look at this map, and maybe I didn't make it clear enough earlier on, is that when you think about the different countries, there's no great pattern in terms of who has identified what skills, how far, how much detail they've gone into in their curricular documents, and whether they've actually spelt out what the learning progression from a very simple skill is to a more sophisticated skill. So the point I'm trying to make here is that identifying that we believe a skill is important is insufficient. What we need to be doing is identifying what does a teacher look for when a student is displaying communication skills at a very basic level. What do those skills look like as that child progresses in their communication skills? How can we see those skills emerging and embedded and integrated into curricula of subjects right through the school system? So I'm really arguing here for an embedded, integrated approach. And we need to, and the way we can do that is through these ideas of learning progressions. So my first point was around, are there any patterns? And there aren't. So it's not about whether a country is a high-income country. It's not about whether a country has students performing high in PISA. Everybody is having to deal with the same issue here, which is we're trying to move the learning goals in our systems. And all of these countries are dealing with that issue. That's the first point. The second point is that what I've done of talking about curriculum is in fact not a great approach, because what we're thinking about is that the learning goals are changing. If we've got different learning goals, qualitatively different learning goals, we need to change our methods of teaching, and we need to change our methods of assessment. And so merely reforming a curriculum is not going to get us anywhere. Okay? So, for example, if I'm going to teach you a fact, a simple fact, I would tell you the fact, you would hopefully memorize it, and you'd be able to retrieve it on demand. When we're talking about teaching or development of skills, we're dealing with a totally different creature, because I can't just tell you the skill. You might know what it is, you might be able to identify it, but how do you learn how to apply it? So that's the challenge that our education systems are confronted with. And our belief is that the idea of identifying these learning progressions in the skills and then helping countries to embed these throughout their curriculum is the way to go. And one of the big issues here is it's not about explicit teaching, it's about implicit. How do we do that? How do we model the skills? If we see a teacher demonstrating critical thinking or problem solving, maybe that's a much better way to go. And so I'm going to hand over to my colleague John here, who will pick up on this.
Thank you so much, Esther. So I am moving now from the global situation to the local and looking at the local realities. My conversion, unlike Esther's, did not come very long ago. I would only have a few months to tell about, because over the last decade, I've been working on learning assessments and pushing for the foundational literacy and numeracy competencies. And I have been running the UWEZO learning assessment in East Africa as part of the greater PAL network, where I see my colleague Bella from Pakistan is here. So what I asked myself around 2016 was, what if, after all this effort and pushing, all that our children in Africa would be able to do is read and count? Would that be adequate for the world? And so we started experimenting even within the PAL network on how to measure other skills, what we called beyond basics. But then those skills were not really that easy. So over the last 6 months or so, I have been working in technical and vocational education space. And what I've been doing is learning. And so I've listened to this global space around 21st century skills, around transferable skills, around soft skills. And so I've been moving around situations where youth are being trained and prepared for work, but also life. And what I can confirm is that there is quite some movement. And there are 3 issues that I would like to highlight here from going around 30 vocational training centers in Kenya. One of the issues is around conceptualizing and prioritizing the skills. So first of all, there is less clarity on whether it is a competency or whether it is a capability or a skill or an attitude or a behavior. And do all these things anyway mean the same? Is it a matter of semantics, or is there fundamental difference in what they mean? Then also the understanding and that maybe many of them, like when you talk about honesty and integrity as a value, do they mean the same, or is one contributing to the other? So that kind of understanding is where we are now in the defining phase. But it is not easy, even to get the students and the systems on it. Like 2 days ago, for instance, I was in one of the counties called Kirinyaga, and I was discussing with the trainer in a vocational training center on what kind of skills they prioritize. And this comes from 30 vocational training centers, so you can see the kind of things we are talking about. Now, what they told me is that they believe that academic skills, even at that level, are necessary. Because if you train a plumber or a carpenter who is not able to take measurement, or who is not able to go to Google and access information and even upgrade their technologies or designs, then we are doing disservice. So teaching of numeracy and literacy, even in a vocational training center, makes sense and is important. But then he told me that students themselves said they saw no need for numeracy, and they revolted against attending numeracy classes. So this negotiation between even that training center itself and the students, and coming to a common ownership of what skills are important, is a process that is necessary. So defining is one key issue, or conceptualizing. The second issue is around methodology, and Esther has touched on that a bit. So in 2008, we have a curriculum, a TVET curriculum in Kenya, that came up with life skills. And what I have realized is that these life skills are taught on the board, and so there is knowledge, but it has remained at the knowledge level. They even examine them and give grades and scores on life skills. But then what we know about life skills is that really it has to be a competence. Knowing about them is good and describing them, but that would be inadequate in getting them to where we want to get them. So what methodologies are best in producing this range of skills? Is it teaching, or is it demonstrating, modeling, the way Esther said, or is it even a whole institution reorganization of the culture? So that if it is time management, for instance, it is expected that whoever is within that compound manages time, and that's how the young people adopt them. So how best we develop this, and even understanding what works, is one of the issues that is pending. And the third one is around assessment. These things are difficult to measure, and that I think I have heard even in this meeting. But it doesn't mean that we really cannot measure what matters. So we need to think about how to assess them, because if we have a clear understanding on how to observe some of these things, then how will we know that our young people are graduating with them? There are suggestions coming up ranging from going to employers and getting employers' appraisal of our graduates so that can go back to the training room. And all these ideas need to be brought together. So this is work that is just beginning. I'm hoping to start now. We are at the evidence stage, moving on to working with the government, and this has started also in looking at the TVET curricula and the breadth of skills that are offered, recognizing that so far we have a framework, an emerging framework of 5 buckets of issues. One is around technical skills, the other around academic/cognitive skills. Then we have social-emotional learning skills, we have life skills, and we have values. So if we have this combination, I think rather than saying what is necessary and what is not, or talking about just 21st century skills or soft skills, we think that for Kenya, it is actually the holistic development of the young person that makes sense. That they need to be able to read and do math, but at the same time, they need decision making, they need communication, they need entrepreneurial skills and all that. So we hope over the next decade that we'll be able probably to create greater understanding and share with the rest of the world. But then why I'm here is also so that I may seek global wisdom and creating connections to inform us so that we may also benefit from what is working elsewhere in the world. Thank you. So we could welcome a few questions or suggestions, and then we interact a little bit. Yes? Do you have a mic, a roaming mic?
So my question, and actually the reason why I came specifically to attend this, obviously, of course, is because it talks about skills, not only to call for the skills, but how to do it and describe it in a more concrete way. But the title of the panel was Aligning the Goals of Formal and Non-Formal Learning Environment. And I was very interested to discuss or hear more about the non-formal, because most of the sessions and panels that we have attended, we're focusing very much, and rightfully so, on the importance of reforming, supporting school systems, etc. But not much has been talked about or discussed the role of non-formal and how non-formal could be actually playing a vital role in complementing the role and not as a substitute for formal education. So I think I would like to discuss and hear more about the role of non-formal. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. If we have any other, but I can be...
Maybe you respond to that one first.
Yeah. Yes, at the back.
I feel today we are living in very pluralistic societies. I would like to see maybe more values or values of all rather than just one particular group. Like, you have the Christian values there. And I'm just wondering, because communities are becoming more and more plural, and would you suggest that because we could be coming from different beliefs and also learning to live together despite different beliefs, and an understanding of diversity of beliefs, and so it might be a good idea to teach children values that are human, across religions and across faiths and groups, rather than focusing on one specific.
Yeah,
That's
understood.
all I just
Yes, understood.
I'd just take those 2 questions.
Thank you.
Hi, so I work with business schools, and there's some in Kenya actually that I work with, and this is a big issue in business and management education as well. How do you have the technical information, but also develop people who have, we talk about critical thinking and all of that. I wanted to suggest that you look at kind of what some of those schools are doing that might be helpful, but also to say that I think that I'd be really curious, that assessment is a very big question, and getting buy-in from students who are looking at a very technical field in vocational. I'm curious how if you're assessing something, people are aware that they're learning it, and if you're going to get any kind of pushback on people who are saying, I don't even want to learn numeracy, I just want to learn, carpentry. If these are touchy-feely or maybe not as obviously professionally useful for people who are looking at that. I'm just curious how you're assessing that.
Okay, thanks. And maybe the last one, the back.
Thanks very much indeed. I work with an organization that works with 1.3 million young people around the world on these specific issues. And I'm really interested in the theory of change that you may be beginning to build in terms of, I guess, the outputs for the young people turning into outcomes, turning into impact, both for themselves and also for communities. And I'd be fascinated to know of what you might be achieving.
Okay. Thanks. Maybe I start and then Esther will complete. First on this, the reason why I didn't even dwell on it is because I've just been throwing in there what people say is important for them. But what is there to understand is that spirituality for the Kenyan context is something worthwhile. Of course, in our model, we wouldn't put Christianity because even Kenya itself is extremely mixed in the kind of beliefs that even the country itself has adopted. So this will change. It's not what we are prioritizing. It's what I hear and I just throw in. Then around the non-formal environments, for sure, what is coming out very clearly is that the formal curriculum will not be able to deliver this. So it is around interactions, how people interact with each other within that institution. It is around how the instructor models these kind of skills that they want the students to espouse. It is around the one-on-one things that happen. It is around what time people arrive, what time people leave, how people interact, and what kind of language people use. So the non-formal environment is, I think, going, and that informal curriculum kind of a setup is certainly going to have even more meaning than this being defined in the formal curriculum. So when we are discussing about pedagogy or andragogy for these sets of skills, it is going to acknowledge that it is that other not so formal mechanisms that will deliver these sets of competencies. Around the theory of change, I think I would also want to hear what your experience is. But what we are thinking is that when the young person has these sets of skills, then they are able to access two pathways. One is employability and their connection to the work environment, not just employability, or employability in the bigger sense, because even them creating their own environment is very important for our context. And the second thing that I have heard very little of it in this conference is around leading a fulfilling life and being happy as a young person, because employment is important, but then we don't just exist to work or to be employed. So how do we also create, develop skills so that youth can develop their fullest human potential and live as human beings who are fulfilled? And so I have written quite a bit. There's quite a bit of reading, and we have an emerging theory of change that I could share. Thanks.
Thank you. I think one point just to pick up on is where in formal education systems there are a number of different transferable skills that are more easily taught. And when we're talking about the alignment issue between the informal and the formal, it seems to me that those skills that we believe are easier to teach, are the ones that we're going to find across both sectors. So, for example, I think that teaching problem solving, teaching communication are much easier than teaching some other skills, and definitely much easier than teaching values. So I think there's a great deal of alignment in both whether it's the tech vox sector or alternate learning system sector and the formal education sector, across those skills like critical thinking, problem solving and communication. When we move into some of the more areas that are more values oriented and attitudes oriented, I think we're facing more of a challenge. And one of the questions would be, is it the responsibility of the education sector to actually be teaching and nurturing areas like attitudes and values? So we've done quite a lot of work in Asia, through UNESCO Bangkok in particular, where we looked at commonality between countries through that Asia region about what they see as important within their education systems. And we do find that the sorts of skills that I just mentioned are the ones that all countries tend to agree with. However, where we move more towards attitudes, values, ethics, morals, beliefs, then we get a much greater diversity of opinion. And so I think that raises a number of different questions. And I think where John particularly has focused is what is happening for Kenya and what is being highlighted in that particular sector about what is needed beyond what I see as the easier skills to measure towards these more difficult areas, which are not skills. Their attitudes, their values, their way of being, their ways of believing. And it's a different kettle of fish.
Thanks. I think I can just make 3 announcements. One is that in Nairobi we have formed a group in TVET called Values and Life Skills. And we are trying to move together. We are now about 50 members convening on a quarterly basis to understand what we are doing and trying to bring that to some common understanding. And we hope by around June we'll be able to develop a model of skills for TVET in Kenya together with government and the people who are actually doing it. And the second thing we are doing is that we are collaborating with the Curriculum Institute for TVET. It's called the CDAC, Curriculum Development Assessment and Certification Council in Nairobi. And we have started looking at the curriculum for instructors because we acknowledge that unless if we start at the instructor or the teacher level, then we'll be unable to achieve impact at the low level. And so that work again has started over the last 2 weeks, and those that would want to follow that, I welcome you. And the last thing that we are doing is we have identified 13 vocational training centers in both rural and urban Kenya. And we are going to work with these institutions that we have come to an agreement, as Professor was saying, to work together in trying what works. So looking at what is happening elsewhere and even collaborating with parents, with government, with the youth themselves, and trying to develop approaches. Many approaches, not just one, many approaches that they would want to try, and then packaging and sharing that knowledge at the national level, but also globally. So we hope this work will continue informing what is happening elsewhere globally, but also we benefiting from whatever you are doing. So I welcome you in case you feel we could work together and walk this journey together. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Oh, last comment or question?
Again, regarding the alignment on non-formal and formal education, I'm so interested in this because I work in the non-formal, but I'm an educator, and I truly believe in the complementarity between both. I also would like to suggest, and maybe we can talk about after the panel, the World Economic Forum has issued a paper, a very interesting paper about identifying the skills of 21st century, and has categorized them into 3 categories: foundational literacies, competencies, and character qualities. And under character qualities falls these issues of values and attitude and morals and stuff. And the idea is how to actually create a model or an alignment model whereby we're working together on the same page between formal and non-formal, rather than having each one a separate model. And then we're not bringing this together. So you get my.
Yeah.
I think one of the things here, if we think about OECD's perspective on global competence, we find a very similar division really across knowledge, skills, attitudes. So I think that sort of trifurcation is something that happens quite a lot. apart from the work that John is doing, also at Brookings, we're starting to look at some of these alignment issues across skills, particularly in the girls sector, because we happen to have a group that's very interested in girls' skills. But one of the things we've become very aware of is that there are so many NGOs working on life skills, and they are working on the same issues that we're seeing emerging in the formal education space. And it seems ridiculous that we're not using each other's experience from the two sectors to try to build something complementary. So I think there are definitely moves toward us looking more at the alignment across these two major sectors in the future.
So thank you so much, and let's keep talking.
Okay, thank you.